An ordinary musician tried the wrong hotel door, but found his biggest break waiting inside. Eli Rodriguez clutched his battered guitar case against his chest as he stumbled through the rain-soaked streets of downtown, his fingers numb with cold and his stomach cramping from hunger. The busking spot outside the metro station had earned him exactly $17.34 over 6 hours, not even enough to cover his portion of rent for the week, let alone food or the guitar strings he desperately needed to replace. His phone buzzed with another text from his roommate, Danny. "Rent's due tomorrow. Landlord's not extending again. Need your half or we're both out." Eli's throat tightened as he typed back, "Working on it. Give me until tonight." But he had no idea where he'd find the money. The coffee shop had cut his hours again, citing slow business. The restaurant gig he'd been counting on had fallen through when they decided to go with recorded music instead of live performances. And street performing in this weather was like trying to squeeze water from stones. People hurried past with their heads down, focused on getting dry, not on tipping struggling musicians. The Grandview Hotel loomed ahead, its golden lights spilling warmth onto the wet sidewalk. Eli had performed in the lobby a few times during the holiday season, when management was feeling generous about seasonal atmosphere. Maybe if he was lucky, the evening concierge would let him play for tips from hotel guests waiting for cabs or dinner reservations. He pushed through the revolving door guitar case, dripping rainwater onto the marble floor. The lobby was busier than usual, well-dressed people moving purposefully toward the elevators, and conference areas the kind of energy that suggested some kind of upscale event. "Excuse me," he said to a woman in an expensive-looking black dress as she passed. "Is there something special happening tonight?" "The Children's Foundation Gala." She replied, barely slowing down. "Third-floor ballroom, big fundraiser." Eli's heart sank. If there was a private event, security would be tighter, and his chances of getting permission to perform in the lobby were essentially zero. But as he started to turn towards the exit, he noticed something that made him pause. A service elevator was open near the back of the lobby, and a catering worker was wheeling equipment toward it. The man looked harried and was juggling multiple tasks. Maybe Eli could slip upstairs and find a quiet corner where he could play without bothering anyone, just long enough to warm up and think through his options. The decision was impulsive and probably stupid, but desperation made people do irrational things. Eli followed the catering worker into the service elevator, staying quiet and trying to look like he belonged there. "Floor?" the worker asked, without really looking at him. "3, Eli said, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. The elevator opened onto a service corridor lined with equipment and supplies for the gala. Eli could hear music and conversation coming from somewhere nearby, the kind of sophisticated party sounds that suggested champagne glasses and charity auctions, and people who'd never worried about making rent. He followed the sound down the corridor, looking for a service entrance, where he might be able to observe the event and figure out if there was any opportunity to perform. Maybe someone would need background music, or perhaps there would be a break in the evening's program where acoustic guitar might be welcome. What he found instead was a door marked Ballroom B Private Function. Through the small window, he could see elegantly dressed guests milling around tables decorated with fresh flowers and candles. A small stage at one end of the room held professional sound equipment, but no performers were currently using it. Eli tried the door handle, expecting it to be locked. Instead, it opened easily, and he found himself standing at the edge of one of the most elegant events he'd ever seen. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over guests who wore more money in jewelry than Eli had ever possessed in his entire life. The conversation was animated, but refined, the kind of social energy that came from people who were accustomed to success and comfort. His first instinct was to back out immediately, but before he could retreat, a woman near the door noticed him. "Are you the musician they said might be coming?" she asked, looking at his guitar case with interest rather than suspicion. Eli's mind raced. Someone had been expecting a musician. Maybe the evening's entertainment had fallen through, or there had been some kind of booking confusion that he could somehow turn to his advantage. "I might be," he said carefully. What kind of music were you looking for? Something acoustic and intimate, the woman replied. The auction portion of the evening isn't for another hour, and people are getting restless. We could use some background music to keep the energy flowing. It was the kind of opportunity that fell into Eli's lap so rarely that he almost didn't recognize it when it happened. A room full of wealthy donors who might actually tip generously a legitimate excuse to be there, and an audience that was already primed to be receptive to live music. I can definitely help with that, he said, trying to sound professional despite his rain-soaked appearance and the nervous energy coursing through his system. Wonderful. Let me introduce you to Margaret Chen. She's organizing tonight's event. She'll want to discuss what you'll play and how long you'll perform. Before Eli could process what was happening, he was being led through the crowd toward a woman in her 50s who radiated the kind of authority that came from successfully managing complex events and difficult personalities. Margaret, this is the guitarist, the first woman said. He's ready to provide some background music until the auction begins. Margaret looked Eli up and down, taking in his modest clothes and slightly disheveled appearance, with the assessing eye of someone who'd learned to make quick decisions about people and situations. Have you performed at fundraising events before? She asked. Several times, Eli replied, which was technically true if you counted the coffee shop benefits he'd played for local charities. I specialize in acoustic arrangements that complement conversation rather than overwhelming it. Perfect. We need something sophisticated but unobtrusive. Can you handle requests if people have specific songs they'd like to hear? Absolutely. The sound system is already set up on the stage. 15-minute sets with 5-minute breaks, and we'll see how it goes. Standard rate is $200 for the evening, plus whatever tips people choose to offer. $200. More than Eli had made in the past month of street performing combined. Plus tips from people who looked like they carried more cash in their wallets than he'd seen in years. That sounds perfect, he managed to say, without his voice cracking from relief. Margaret nodded briskly. Excellent. You can start whenever you're ready. Eli made his way to the small stage, his hands shaking as he opened his guitar case and pulled out the instrument that had been his companion through years of struggle and uncertainty. The guitar was old and showed wear from constant use, but it had been professionally maintained and produced the warm, rich tones that had kept him motivated through countless rejections and disappointments. As he adjusted the microphone and checked the sound levels, he became aware that several guests had turned their attention towards the stage. The room wasn't completely quiet, but there was a shift in energy that suggested people were curious about what they were about to hear. Eli started with a gentle finger-picking arrangement of "The Way You Look Tonight," sophisticated enough for the crowd, familiar enough that people could hum along if they wanted to, and technically complex enough to demonstrate that he was a serious musician, rather than just someone who knew a few chords. The response was immediate. Conversations didn't stop, but they grew quieter, allowing the music to become part of the room's atmosphere, rather than competing with it. Several people moved closer to the stage, and Eli noticed that his playing seemed to be creating exactly the kind of elegant ambiance that Margaret had been looking for. He transitioned seamlessly into Autumn Leaves, then Fly Me to the Moon, building a repertoire of jazz standards and contemporary songs arranged for acoustic guitar. His fingers found their confidence as he settled into the performance years of playing in challenging conditions, having taught him how to read an audience and adapt his music to match their mood. Halfway through his second set, a man in an expensive suit approached the stage area. He was probably in his 50s with the kind of silver-gray hair and confident bearing that suggested success in whatever field he'd chosen. Unlike most of the guests who were treating the music as pleasant background, this man was listening intently, his attention focused entirely on Eli's playing. When Eli finished Georgia on My Mind, the man stepped closer to the stage. "That was beautifully arranged," he said during the brief pause between songs. "Did you write that arrangement yourself?" "I did. Most of these are my own interpretations of standards." "I can tell. You've got excellent instincts for melody and harmony. How long have you been performing professionally?" Eli felt heat rise in his cheeks. The honest answer was that he'd never really performed professionally, He'd been struggling to survive as a musician for years without achieving anything that could honestly be called professional success. "I've been playing seriously for about 8 years," he said, which at least had the virtue of being true. "Still working on building my career?" The man nodded thoughtfully. "Are you represented by anyone, manager, agent, record label?" "Not currently." "Interesting. Would you mind if I listened for a few more songs? I'd like to hear how you handle different styles." Of course. Eli launched into Blackbird, his fingers dancing across the strings in the complex finger-picking pattern that the Beatles song required. He followed it with an original composition he'd been working on, a melancholy piece about longing and hope that drew from his own experiences of struggle and persistence. The original song seemed to capture something in the room's atmosphere. Conversations grew quieter, and more guests turned their attention toward the stage. When Eli finished, there was a moment of genuine silence before applause broke out, not the polite, distracted clapping that had followed his earlier songs, but the kind of enthusiastic response that meant he'd truly connected with his audience. The man in the expensive suit was now standing directly in front of the stage, his expression intense and thoughtful. "That last song," he said, as Eli adjusted his guitar for the next piece. "Was that your composition?" "Yes, sir. It's called Waiting for the Light." "It's remarkable. The melody line, the chord progressions, the way you built emotional tension, and then resolved it, that's sophisticated songwriting." "Thank you. I've been working on original material for several years. I'd like to talk with you after your performance if you have time. My name is David Carter." The name meant nothing to Eli, but something in the man's tone suggested this was a conversation that could be important. "I'd be happy to talk, Mr. Carter." Eli finished his set with Moon River, chosen partly because it was a crowd pleaser and partly because the gentle, optimistic melody felt appropriate for ending on a hopeful note. As the last notes faded, the applause was warm and sustained the kind of response that meant he'd successfully provided exactly what the event organizers had been looking for. Margaret appeared at the edge of the stage as Eli was packing up his guitar. "That was perfect," she said, handing him an envelope. "Exactly the atmosphere we needed. Several guests asked me to make sure you knew how much they enjoyed your performance." Eli opened the envelope and nearly dropped it. Along with the promised $200, there were several additional bills tips from guests that brought the total to over $400, more money than he'd made in months. "Thank you so much for this opportunity," he said, meaning it more than Margaret could possibly understand. "You earned it. I'll definitely keep your information on file for future events." As Margaret walked away, David Carter approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "Congratulations on an excellent performance," he said, offering Eli one of the glasses. "You mentioned that you're not currently represented by anyone." "That's right. Can I ask what your goals are as a musician?" "Are you looking to tour record right for other artists?" Eli almost laughed at the question. His goals had become so modest over the years: pay rent, buy food, maybe save enough money to record a demo someday, that he'd almost forgotten about the bigger dreams that had originally motivated him to pursue music. "All of those things, ideally. I'd love to record an album of original material, build an audience, maybe tour, if there's interest in my music." "What's been holding you back?" The question was direct enough that Eli decided to answer honestly. "Money mainly, and connections. It's hard to get people to listen to your music when you don't have the resources to record professionally or the network to get in front of industry professionals." Carter nodded thoughtfully. "The music business is notoriously difficult to break into without either significant financial resources or someone willing to invest in your potential." "Exactly. Eli, I should probably explain who I am. I'm a music producer. I work primarily with singer-songwriters and acoustic artists, helping them develop their sound and get their music to the right audiences." Eli's heart started racing. "What kind of artists do you work with?" "Artists who have genuine talent but haven't had the opportunities to showcase it properly. People who write compelling original material and have the performance skills to connect with audiences, but need support with recording marketing and industry connections." "That sounds like exactly what I need." "It might be, but I'd want to hear more of your original material before making any commitments. What you played tonight suggests that you have real potential, but I'd need to understand the full range of your capabilities. I have dozens of original songs. I could play them for you any time. Carter pulled out his business card. Why don't you come to my studio next week? Bring your guitar and whatever original material you think best represents your artistic vision. We'll spend a few hours going through your catalog and discussing what kind of career path might make sense. Eli took the card with trembling hands. David Carter, producer. An address in the part of town where real recording studios operated, where actual music industry professionals worked. Are you offering to work with me? I'm offering to explore the possibility. What happened tonight, the way you connected with that audience, the quality of your original composition, your professional approach to performing those, are all positive indicators. But I'd want to do proper due diligence before proposing any specific arrangements. What would working together look like? If we move forward, I'd help you record a professional EP, develop your artistic brand, and connect you with booking agents and venue owners who work with acoustic artists. Eventually, if the music finds an audience, we'd look at full album production and more extensive touring opportunities. Eli felt dizzy with the possibilities Carter was describing. Professional recording industry connections, actual career development. Everything he'd been struggling toward for years was being offered by someone who seemed to understand both the music business and the challenges facing independent artists. Mr. Carter, I have to ask, why me? You must meet dozens of musicians who are looking for exactly this kind of opportunity. I do. But most of them are either technically proficient without being emotionally compelling or emotionally authentic without having developed the professional skills necessary for commercial success. You seem to have both real songwriting talent and the performance experience to deliver it effectively. What made you notice me tonight? Honestly, the way you handled being in a situation you clearly weren't expecting. Most musicians would have been intimidated by this crowd, would have played it safe with covers and familiar material. You took risks, shared original work, and adapted your performance style to match the room's energy. That shows both confidence and professional instincts. As the gala began winding down around them, Carter and Eli continued talking about music, career goals, and the realities of building sustainable success as an independent artist. Carter asked detailed questions about Eli's musical background, his songwriting process, and his willingness to commit time and energy to serious career development. One more question, Carter said as they prepared to leave. How did you end up performing here tonight? Margaret mentioned that you were expected, but I got the impression that your booking was somewhat last minute. Eli felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. I should probably be honest about that. Please do. I wasn't booked for this event. I came to the hotel hoping to perform in the lobby for tips, got lost, trying to find a good spot, and accidentally wandered into your gala. When someone assumed I was the entertainment, I went with it rather than admitting I was trespassing. Carter stared at him for a moment, then began laughing, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement and what sounded like admiration. So you're telling me that you crashed an exclusive charity fundraiser, convinced the organizers to let you perform, delivered a professional quality set that impressed a room full of sophisticated guests, and earned more in tips than some musicians make in a month. When you put it that way, it sounds pretty ridiculous. It sounds like exactly the kind of initiative and adaptability that successful musicians need. Eli, most people would have apologized and left when they realized they were in the wrong place. You saw an opportunity and had the courage and skill to seize it. I was pretty desperate. I needed the money to make rent. Desperation can be a powerful motivator, but it doesn't create talent. What you demonstrated tonight was genuine ability combined with professional instincts and the willingness to take calculated risks. As they exchanged contact information and confirmed their studio meeting for the following week, Eli felt like he was experiencing the most surreal and hopeful moment of his adult life. The struggling street musician who'd been facing eviction 12 hours earlier was now being courted by a legitimate music producer who saw commercial potential in his work. Walking back through the hotel lobby with over $400 in his pocket and a meeting scheduled that could change his entire career trajectory, Eli reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A wrong turn, a case of mistaken identity, and the courage to perform when opportunity presented itself, all combining to create the break he'd been working toward for years. Sometimes the doors that led to your dreams really were the ones you opened by accident. And sometimes when you were brave enough to walk through those doors despite not knowing what waited on the other side, you discovered that everything you'd been searching for had been waiting for you to find the right entrance. His phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "Found the rent money yet?" Eli smiled as he typed back, "Rent's covered, and I think everything's about to change." For the first time in years, he wasn't just hoping things would get better. He actually believed they would. 1 week later, Eli sat in David Carter's professional recording studio, surrounded by equipment that represented more money than he'd ever seen in one place. Gold and platinum records lined the walls, along with photographs of Carter working with artists whose names Eli recognized from radio and streaming playlists. "Nervous?" Carter asked, as he finished setting up the recording equipment. "Terrified," Eli admitted. "This is the nicest studio I've ever been in. Actually, it's the only professional studio I've ever been in." "Good. A little fear keeps you sharp. Now I want to hear everything your strongest original material, the songs you're most proud of, the pieces that best represent who you are as an artist." Eli had spent the week preparing for this moment, practicing his catalog, and selecting the dozen songs he felt showcased his range and depth as a songwriter. He started with "Waiting for the Light," the composition that had captured Carter's attention at the gala, then moved through a collection of pieces that explored themes of love, loss, hope, and the struggles of pursuing dreams in an uncertain world. Carter listened intently, occasionally asking questions about chord progressions or lyrical choices, but mostly just absorbing the music with the focused attention of someone who understood the technical and commercial aspects of songwriting. After 90 minutes, Eli finished with "Miles to Go," a driving, optimistic song about persistence and the rewards of refusing to give up on your goals. "That's everything I've got that feels ready to share," he said, setting down his guitar. Carter was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the notes he'd been taking throughout the session. "Eli, I'm going to be very direct with you about what I heard today." Eli's stomach clenched. "Okay. You have genuine talent as both a songwriter and performer. Your melodies are memorable, your chord progressions show sophistication without being overly complex, and your lyrics address universal themes in ways that feel personal and authentic." "Thank you. But there's more. You also have something that can't be taught: a distinctive voice as an artist. Your songs sound like they come from someone who's lived the experiences he's writing about, not someone who's trying to imitate what they think will sell." Eli felt relief flooding through his system. "So you think there's potential for commercial success?" "I think there's potential for significant commercial success with the right development and marketing support." Carter leaned forward. "Here's what I'd like to propose." He outlined a comprehensive development plan that took Eli's breath away. Professional recording of an EP featuring 5 of his strongest songs, working with session musicians to create full arrangements, professional mixing and mastering, and a marketing strategy designed to build audience awareness through streaming platforms and live performance opportunities. "The initial investment would be substantial," Carter explained. "Studio time, musician fees, production costs, marketing budget, we're looking at roughly $50,000 to do this properly." Eli's heart sank. "I don't have that kind of money. I barely have $500 to my name." "I know. That's why I'm proposing a partnership arrangement. My company would cover all upfront costs in exchange for a percentage of future earnings and a multi-year management contract." "What kind of percentage?" 60-40 split on all revenue for the first 3 years, with the percentage gradually shifting in your favor as we recoup the initial investment. After 5 years, assuming we're both happy with the partnership, we'd renegotiate terms that reflect your increased market value. Eli tried to process the numbers and implications. "So you'd be betting $50,000 on my potential. I'd be investing $50,000 in an artist I believe has the talent and work ethic to generate significant returns for both of us." "What would my responsibilities be?" "Complete creative control over your music with input and guidance from me about commercial viability. commitment to promotional activities, interviews, performances, social media engagement, availability for touring when opportunities arise, and continued songwriting and artistic development. Creative control means I get to decide what songs I record and how they sound, within reason. If you want to record a death metal album, we'd need to have some serious conversations. But yes, the goal is to develop and showcase your authentic artistic voice, not to manufacture something artificial. Eli looked around the studio, trying to imagine his songs being recorded with professional equipment and experienced session musicians. The opportunity was everything he'd dreamed of, and more than he'd dared hope for. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Carter?" "David, and yes, why are you willing to take this risk on me? You said you meet lots of musicians looking for opportunities like this." David smiled. "Because in 25 years in this business, I've learned that technical skill is common, but genuine artistry is rare. You write songs that make people feel something, and you perform them with authenticity that can't be faked. That combination is what creates lasting careers. What happens if the EP doesn't find an audience, if people don't connect with the music the way you think they will? Then we analyze what went wrong, adjust our approach, and try again. Building a music career is rarely about instant success. It's about consistent effort over time, learning from both successes and failures. And if it does work, if the EP gets attention and people want to hear more, then we're positioned to move quickly to capitalize on that interest. Full album production, expanded touring, potential licensing opportunities for film and television collaboration with other artists. Eli felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at possibilities that were both thrilling and terrifying. Signing with David would mean giving up control over his career timeline and a significant portion of his potential earnings. But it would also mean access to resources and opportunities that he could never create for himself. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Eli, I want you to understand something. Opportunities like this don't come along often. Not because I'm anything special, but because the combination of talent, timing, and resources rarely align perfectly." "What do you mean?" "You have the songs and the performance ability. The music market right now is hungry for authentic acoustic artists who can connect with audiences emotionally. And I have the resources and industry connections to help you reach that market effectively. 6 months from now, any one of those factors might be different." Eli nodded, understanding that David was encouraging him to act decisively without pressuring him to make an uninformed choice. "How long do I have to decide?" 2 weeks. That gives you time to think it through, carefully maybe consult with other people whose judgment you trust, and ask me any additional questions that come up. They spent another hour discussing details, recording schedules, marketing timelines, performance expectations, and contract terms. David answered every question with patience and thoroughness, never making Eli feel rushed or uninformed. As Eli prepared to leave, David handed him a folder containing sample contracts, projected timelines, and contact information for other artists who'd worked with his company. "Talk to them," David suggested. "Ask about their experiences, whether they felt the partnership was beneficial, what they wish they'd known before signing. Make sure this feels right for you before making any commitments." Driving home in his beat-up Honda, Eli's mind raced with everything he'd learned and experienced. The meeting had exceeded his expectations in every way. David was professional, knowledgeable, and seemed genuinely invested in Eli's long-term success rather than just looking for a quick profit. But the decision still felt enormous. Signing would mean betting his entire future on his ability to succeed as a professional musician, with all the uncertainty and pressure that entailed. Not signing meant continuing to struggle financially, while hoping that another opportunity might come along someday. That evening, Eli called his sister Maria, the one person whose judgment he trusted completely. "Let me make sure I understand this," she said, after he'd explained the entire situation. "A legitimate music producer wants to invest $50,000 in your career. You'd maintain creative control over your music, and the financial terms improve in your favor over time." That's right. And the downside is what exactly? I'd be giving up a significant percentage of earnings for several years, and if I fail, I'd owe someone $50,000 that I could never repay. Eli, you're 27 years old. You're barely surviving financially doing something you're passionate about, and someone with industry experience thinks you have commercial potential. What exactly are you afraid of? The question was direct enough to force Eli to examine his real concerns. I'm afraid of succeeding and then losing it. I'm afraid of getting my hopes up and having them crushed. I'm afraid that I'm not actually as good as David thinks I am. Those are all possibilities. But what's the alternative? Keep playing on street corners and hoping something changes. When you put it that way, it sounds pretty obvious. It is pretty obvious. You've been working toward this opportunity for years. Someone is offering to help you achieve your goals professionally and commercially. Unless there's something about David or his company that feels wrong to you, this sounds like exactly what you've been hoping for. That night, Eli spent hours researching David Carter's company and talking to the artists whose contact information he'd been given. Every conversation confirmed what he'd sensed during their meeting. David was respected in the industry, his artists felt supported and fairly treated, and the business model created genuine opportunities for career development. By the end of the week, Eli knew what his decision would be. But before calling David, he wanted to do one more thing. He returned to the corner outside the metro station, where he'd been busking the night of the gala. Setting up his guitar case and tuning his instrument, he began playing the same songs he'd performed for David, but this time for the commuters and passers-by who'd been his audience for years. As people dropped coins and bills into his case, several stopping to listen to full songs, Eli realized that his music had always had the power to connect with audiences. David's offer wasn't about changing who he was as an artist. It was about giving him the tools and platform to reach more people with music he was already creating. The next morning, Eli called David Carter's office. "I've made my decision," he said when David came on the line, "and I'd like to move forward with the partnership. When can we start recording?" "Congratulations, Eli. I think you're making a choice you'll be proud of for the rest of your career." As they discussed next steps and scheduling, Eli looked around his modest apartment, the same space where he'd written most of his songs, where he'd struggled to pay rent, where he'd dreamed of opportunities exactly like the one he was now accepting. The wrong door that had led him to the gala had turned out to be exactly the right entrance to everything he'd been working toward. Sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities really did come disguised as accidents, and sometimes having the courage to walk through an unexpected door was the first step toward discovering your true potential. In 6 months, when his EP was released, and he was performing in venues he'd only dreamed about, Eli would look back on this moment as the turning point when everything changed. But right now, all he felt was gratitude for the random series of events that had led a struggling street musician to find his biggest break waiting behind the wrong hotel door. 6 months later, Eli stood backstage at the Blue Note, one of the most prestigious acoustic venues in the city, listening to the sold-out crowd settling into their seats. His debut EP, Waiting for the Light, had been streaming for 3 months and had already generated over 2 million plays across all platforms. Music blogs were calling him the next great voice in contemporary folk, and his booking agent had inquiries for performances stretching into the following year. 5 minutes until showtime. David Carter said, appearing beside him with the calm confidence that had characterized their entire working relationship. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm living someone else's life," Eli replied honestly. 6 months ago, I was busking for grocery money. Tonight, I'm headlining a venue that hosts Grammy winners. Tonight, you're exactly where your talent and hard work have earned you the right to be. The transformation had been remarkable, but not effortless. The recording process had pushed Eli to refine his songs in ways he'd never considered working with session musicians, who brought new dimensions to his compositions while preserving the intimate, authentic feel that made his music distinctive. David had guided him through every aspect of professional music making, from studio techniques to media interviews, to the business side of building a sustainable career. "David, can I ask you something I've been wondering about?" "Of course." That night at the gala when you first heard me play, did you already know you wanted to work with me? Or was it something that developed over the course of the evening? David smiled. I knew within 3 songs. The technical proficiency was obvious immediately, but what convinced me was watching how you connected with an audience that wasn't necessarily predisposed to appreciate acoustic music. You made them care about your songs through sheer authenticity, and you were confident that would translate to commercial success. I was confident that authenticity combined with professional development and proper marketing would find an audience. The level of success has exceeded even my optimistic projections. A stage manager appeared to give them the 2-minute warning. Eli picked up his guitar and checked his tuning one final time, the familiar ritual helping to calm his pre-performance nerves. "Any last-minute advice?" he asked David. "Trust your instincts. These people came here to hear the songs that made them fall in love with your music in the first place. Give them the authentic Eli Rodriguez experience, and everything else will take care of itself." Eli walked onto the stage to sustained applause, looking out at an audience that included music industry professionals, devoted fans who'd discovered his music online, and people who were hearing his songs for the first time. The diversity of the crowd reflected how his music had found audiences across different demographics and musical preferences. He opened with "Miles to Go," the upbeat, optimistic song that had become his signature piece. The audience response was immediate, and enthusiastic people singing along to choruses they'd learned from streaming his EP dozens of times. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Eli said during the brief pause between songs. 6 months ago, I was playing these same songs on street corners, hoping someone might drop $1 in my guitar case. The fact that you're all here in this incredible venue listening to music I wrote in my tiny apartment, it's literally a dream come true. He continued with a mix of songs from the EP and newer material he'd been developing, each piece receiving the kind of focused, appreciative attention that acoustic artists dream of finding. When he reached "Waiting for the Light," the song that had started everything, the audience was completely silent during the verses, hanging on every word and melodic phrase. Halfway through his set, Eli noticed a familiar figure near the back of the venue. Margaret Chen, the event organizer from the gala, was sitting with several well-dressed companions, smiling at his performance with obvious pleasure and pride. During the break between sets, she approached the stage area, where Eli was greeting fans and signing autographs. "I had to come see how the mysterious musician from our charity gala was doing," she said with a warm smile. "I've been following your career development with great interest. Margaret, I owe you a huge debt of gratitude. If you hadn't been willing to let an unknown performer take the stage that night, you earned that opportunity through your professionalism and talent. But I'm glad it worked out so well for everyone involved." "How so?" "Well, you got your career break. David found an artist he's excited to work with, and our foundation has been getting credit for discovering emerging talent. It's what you might call a win-win-win situation." As Margaret returned to her seat for the second set, Eli reflected on how many people had played a role in his journey from struggling street musician to professional recording artist. David's investment and guidance had been crucial, but so had Margaret's willingness to take a chance on an unexpected performer and the gala guests who'd responded so positively to his music. The second set featured more experimental material, newer songs that pushed his artistic boundaries while maintaining the emotional authenticity that had become his trademark. The audience remained engaged and enthusiastic, confirming that his fan base was interested in his artistic growth rather than just wanting him to repeat his initial success. He closed the evening with an acoustic arrangement of "Blackbird," the Beatles song he'd played at the gala, dedicated to everyone who's still working toward their dreams and hasn't found their moment yet. As the audience gave him a standing ovation, Eli looked out at the crowd that had gathered to hear his music people, who'd paid money to experience songs he'd written during his darkest moments of financial and creative struggle. The validation was profound, but more importantly, he could see that his music was creating the kind of emotional connection he'd always hoped to achieve. Backstage after the show, David was waiting with updates about upcoming opportunities. "Rolling Stone wants to do a feature story. NPR is interested in having you on their morning show, And we've got offers for opening slots with 3 different touring acts that could introduce you to much larger audiences. Which tours? Folk festivals mainly, but also some acoustic showcases in larger venues. Nothing that would compromise your artistic integrity, but exposure that could significantly expand your fan base. Eli nodded, still processing the surreal nature of his current circumstances. David, I keep waiting for someone to tell me this is all a mistake, that I don't actually belong in professional music. That's normal. Most artists struggle with imposter syndrome, especially during rapid career growth. But Eli, you need to understand something: you didn't get lucky. You prepared for years, developed genuine skills, and had the courage to seize an opportunity when it presented itself. The opportunity that came from walking through the wrong door. The opportunity that came from being ready when the right moment arrived. If you hadn't spent years developing your songwriting and performance skills that night at the gala, would have been just an embarrassing mistake instead of a career-launching event. As they packed up Eli's equipment and prepared to leave the venue, David shared some longer-term possibilities that were beginning to emerge. We're getting inquiries about film and television licensing for your songs. Your music has the kind of emotional resonance that works well for soundtrack applications. What kind of projects? Independent films mainly, but also some network television shows that feature acoustic artists. Licensing can be incredibly lucrative and helps expose your music to audiences who might not discover it otherwise. And the next album? We'll start working on it as soon as you're ready. The EP established your sound and built an audience. The full album is where we really explore your range as an artist and songwriter. Walking to their cars in the venue's back alley, Eli looked up at the city lights and thought about the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. Less than a year ago, he'd been convinced that his musical dreams were probably unrealistic, that he'd eventually have to give up performing and find a more practical way to make a living. Now he was a professional recording artist with a growing fan base, industry recognition, and opportunities that extended far beyond what he'd originally imagined possible. The transformation hadn't changed who he was as a person or an artist, but it had given him the platform and resources to share his music with audiences who appreciated and supported his work. "David," he said as they reached their cars. "Yeah, thank you. Not just for the business partnership, but for believing in my potential when I was having trouble believing in it myself. Thank you for having the talent and work ethic to justify that belief. This partnership has been rewarding for me too. There's nothing better than watching an artist find their audience and achieve the recognition they deserve." Driving home through the city where he'd struggled for so many years, Eli felt a deep sense of gratitude for the series of events that had led him from street performing to professional success. The wrong door had led to exactly the right opportunity, but only because he'd been prepared to walk through it when it opened. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister, Maria. "Saw the concert footage online. So proud of you. Dad would have been amazed." Eli smiled, thinking about his father who died when Eli was in college, before he'd seriously committed to pursuing music professionally. His dad had always encouraged his musical interests, but had worried about the financial instability of an artistic career. "He'd probably still tell me to have a backup plan," Eli texted back. "Maybe. But he'd also be incredibly proud of what you've achieved through hard work and talent." As Eli pulled into his new apartment complex, still modest but in a safe neighborhood, with a dedicated space where he could write and practice without disturbing neighbors, he reflected on how success had changed his daily life, while leaving his core values and artistic vision intact. The struggling musician who'd crashed a charity gala 6 months earlier had become a professional artist with a sustainable career and a growing reputation. But he was still the same person who wrote songs about hope and perseverance, who believed that music could create emotional connections between strangers who understood that the most meaningful successes were the ones earned through preparation meeting opportunity. Sometimes the wrong door really was the entrance to everything you'd been searching for. And sometimes, when you were brave enough to keep walking through unexpected openings, you discovered that your dreams had been waiting for you to find the courage to claim them. Eli's journey was just beginning, but he already knew that whatever came next, He would never forget the lesson of that rainy night when desperation and courage had combined to create the most extraordinary opportunity of his life. 2 years after that pivotal night at the gala, Eli Rodriguez stood in the wings of the Hollywood Bowl, preparing for the most significant performance of his rapidly ascending career. His debut album, Finding Home, had gone gold, spawned 3 radio hits, and established him as one of the most promising acoustic artists of his generation. Tonight, he was opening for Sarah McLachlan in front of 17,000 people, the largest audience he'd ever faced. 5 minutes, Mr. Rodriguez, the stage manager called out, using the formal address that still felt surreal to Eli. David Carter appeared beside him, carrying the calm energy that had guided Eli through every major milestone of his career development. "Same advice as always," David said with a smile. "Trust your preparation, connect with the music, and remember that these people came here because your songs mean something to them." 17,000 people, Eli said, shaking his head in amazement. 2 years ago, I was excited when 12 people stopped to listen to me play on the street. And your music was just as powerful then as it is now. The only difference is the size of the audience that gets to experience it. The transformation had been extraordinary, but methodical. After the success of his EP, they'd worked for 8 months on his full-length debut, crafting an album that showcased his range while maintaining the intimate, authentic sound that had originally captured people's attention. The recording process had pushed Eli to grow as both a songwriter and performer, working with accomplished session musicians and exploring production techniques that enhanced his music without overwhelming its essential character. "David, can I tell you something that's been on my mind? Always. I keep thinking about that night at the gala, about how accidentally ending up in that room changed my entire life trajectory. It makes me wonder how many other people are out there with real talent who just haven't had the right opportunity presented to them. That's something successful artists think about a lot. The awareness that luck and timing played a role in your success, even when that success was built on genuine preparation and ability. Is there anything we can do about that? Use the platform I've built to help other artists get opportunities." David's expression grew thoughtful. "Actually, I've been hoping you'd eventually ask that question. There are several ways we could structure mentorship or development programs that would benefit emerging artists. What did you have in mind? Songwriting workshops at community centers, maybe a scholarship fund for musicians who need financial support to record demos, partnerships with local venues to provide performance opportunities for unknown artists." "I love all of those ideas. What would it take to make them happen? Mainly time and commitment from you. Your growing profile would attract attention to the programs, and your experience navigating the transition from street performer to professional artist would provide credible guidance to participants." As they continued discussing possibilities for supporting other musicians, Eli felt a familiar sense of purpose and excitement. Success had given him resources and influence, but more importantly, it had shown him how much difference the right support could make in an artist's development. The stage manager returned to give the final call. Eli picked up his guitar and performed the pre-show ritual that had become second nature, checking his tuning, reviewing his set list, and taking a moment to center himself before connecting with the audience. "One more thing," David said, as Eli prepared to take the stage. "Margaret Chen is here tonight with a group from the Children's Foundation. She wanted me to tell you how proud she is of everything you've accomplished." Eli smiled, thinking about the woman whose willingness to take a chance on an unexpected performer had started this entire journey. "I'll make sure to thank her afterward. I owe her more than she probably realizes. Actually, she knows exactly how important that night was. She's been telling people that the Foundation's greatest success isn't the money they raised at the gala, it's the career they accidentally launched." Walking onto the stage of the Hollywood Bowl, Eli was struck by the vastness of the venue and the sea of faces stretching back into the darkness. The audience represented every demographic imaginable: teenagers who'd discovered his music on TikTok, adults who appreciated sophisticated songwriting, musicians who respected his technical abilities, and casual fans who simply enjoyed the emotional honesty of his performances. He opened with "Miles to Go," now arranged for a full band, but retaining the optimistic energy that had made it his signature song. The response was immediate and overwhelming, 17,000 people singing along to lyrics he'd written during his darkest period of financial struggle. "Good evening, everyone," he said during the pause between songs. "I'm Eli Rodriguez, and I have to tell you, standing on this stage feels like the most beautiful, impossible thing that's ever happened to me." He continued with a mix of material from both his EP and album, each song receiving the kind of focused, enthusiastic response that confirmed his music was connecting with audiences across different backgrounds and musical preferences. When he reached "Waiting for the Light," the song that had captured David Carter's attention 2 years earlier, the entire venue fell silent during the verses, creating an intimacy that seemed impossible in such a large space. "I want to tell you about this next song," Eli said, settling into the storytelling mode that had become one of his performance trademarks. "2 years ago, I was a broke street musician who accidentally wandered into a charity gala and convinced the organizers to let me perform. That night changed my life, but it started with this song about hope and persistence, and believing that better things are possible even when you can't see how they'll happen." The story drew warm applause and laughter, and Eli realized that sharing his journey had become as important as the music itself. People connected with the narrative of struggle and breakthrough, seeing in his success the possibility that their own dreams might be achievable with enough persistence and preparation. He closed his set with "Finding Home," the title track from his album that had become a radio favorite. The song explored themes of belonging and identity that resonated with audiences who'd experienced their own journeys of self-discovery and growth. As the audience gave him a sustained standing ovation, Eli looked out at the 17,000 people who'd chosen to spend their evening listening to music he'd created in his small apartment during years of financial uncertainty. The validation was profound, but more meaningful was the awareness that his songs were providing emotional connection and inspiration to people he'd never meet. Backstage after his performance, Eli was greeted by Sarah McLachlan herself, who offered warm congratulations on his set and invited him to join her for the final song of her performance. "Your music has real depth," she told him as they prepared for the collaboration. "It's rare to find artists who can combine technical proficiency with genuine emotional authenticity. You should be proud of what you've built." "Thank you. That means everything, coming from someone whose career I've admired for so long." The joint performance of "Angel" was magical, two voices blending in harmonies that showcased both artists' abilities while creating something neither could have achieved alone. The audience response was ecstatic, and Eli realized he was experiencing one of those perfect moments that would remain vivid for the rest of his life. After the show, Margaret Chen found him in the backstage reception area, accompanied by several board members from the Children's Foundation. "Eli, I couldn't be more proud of what you've accomplished," she said, giving him a warm hug. "You've exceeded every expectation any of us could have had that night at the gala. I owe it all to your willingness to take a chance on someone you didn't know. You owe it to your talent and preparation. I just happened to be in the right place to recognize potential when I saw it." One of the board members stepped forward. "We've been following your career with great interest, and we'd like to discuss a potential partnership with you." "What kind of partnership?" "We're launching a new initiative to provide music education and performance opportunities for underprivileged youth. Your story of overcoming financial obstacles to pursue artistic dreams would be perfect for inspiring and mentoring young musicians." Eli felt his heart race with excitement. "I'd love to be involved. What would that look like?" "Workshops, masterclasses, maybe a scholarship program for talented students who need financial support to develop their abilities. Your growing profile would attract attention to the initiative and demonstrate to participants that success is possible with dedication and the right opportunities." As they discussed details and possibilities, Eli realized that his career had reached a point where he could begin giving back in meaningful ways. The platform he'd built through his music could now be used to create opportunities for other aspiring artists who were facing the same challenges he'd overcome. Later that evening, as he and David drove through the Hollywood Hills, Eli reflected on how dramatically his life had changed, and how much more it might continue to evolve. David, I keep thinking about something Margaret said tonight about recognizing potential when she saw it. How did you know I was worth the investment you made in me? Honestly, I didn't know for certain, but I knew you had the musical ability, the work ethic, and the authenticity that successful artists need. The rest was educated guesswork based on 25 years of experience in the music business. What made you confident enough to risk $50,000 on educated guesswork? David smiled. Because the potential upside was so significant, and because I believed you had the character to work hard and grow as an artist even if initial success was modest. And now I know that my initial assessment was conservative. You've exceeded every projection we made about audience development, commercial potential, and artistic growth. As they reached Eli's house, a modest but comfortable place in the hills where he could write and practice without disturbing neighbors, David shared some new opportunities that were beginning to emerge. We're getting inquiries about international touring. Your music is finding audiences in Europe and Australia that are interested in acoustic singer-songwriters. How do you feel about international expansion? I think you're ready for it, artistically and professionally. Your music translates well across cultural boundaries, and touring internationally would expose you to new influences and audiences that could inform your future songwriting. What about the mentorship programs we discussed? Would international touring interfere with those commitments? We'd structure everything to complement each other. The visibility from touring would actually enhance the impact of mentorship initiatives, and working with emerging artists would keep you connected to the passion and hunger that drives great music. Standing in his driveway, looking out at the city lights spread below, Eli thought about the extraordinary journey that had brought him from street performer to internationally recognized artist. The wrong door that had led him to the gala had opened onto a path he'd never imagined possible, but every step along that path had required choices about how to use the opportunities he'd been given. David, I want to make sure that whatever we do next, we're building something that lasts not just commercial success, but meaningful impact. I want my career to be about more than selling records and filling venues. That's exactly the right attitude. The artists who have sustainable, fulfilling careers are the ones who use their platforms to create value beyond their own success. Then let's start planning the mentorship programs alongside the international touring. I want to be actively helping other artists while I'm building my own career. As David drove away and Eli entered his house, he passed the wall where he'd hung the business card from that first meeting at David's studio. The simple piece of cardstock had become the most valuable thing he owned, not because of its monetary worth, but because it represented the moment when his dreams had begun transforming into reality. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. Maria saw clips from tonight's show online. You looked like you belonged on that stage. So proud of everything you've achieved. Eli smiled as he typed back. Thanks. But you know what? The best part isn't the big venues or the recognition. It's knowing that the music I write in this little house reaches people and means something to them. That's why you deserve all this success. You never forgot what really matters. As Eli settled into his home studio to work on new material, surrounded by the guitars and recording equipment that had become the tools of his professional life, he reflected on how the accidental encounter at the charity gala had taught him the most important lesson of his career. Success wasn't just about talent or hard work or even opportunity. It was about being ready to recognize and seize the right moments when they appeared, often in the most unexpected forms. The wrong door had led to the right life because he'd been prepared to walk through it with courage and authenticity. And now, as he began planning ways to create similar opportunities for other artists, Eli understood that his greatest achievement wouldn't be his own success. It would be using that success to ensure that other talented musicians didn't have to depend on accidental encounters to find their big breaks. Sometimes the most extraordinary doors really were the ones you opened by mistake. But the most meaningful success came from making sure those doors stayed open for others who were still searching for their own way home.